Incoming message.
All right, team, let's get right into today's briefing. I'm stepping into the role of your senior counterintelligence lead for this explainer because, frankly, we are looking at a highly unusual, borderline bizarre data set today. What we're doing is taking a seemingly absurd political media pattern, the kind of stuff you've probably seen mocked on late-night TV, and we're treating it as a potential clandestine communications channel. We are completely bypassing the political noise. Instead, we're applying strict, rigorous pattern recognition to identify what might just be a massively sophisticated operational security vulnerability unfolding right in front of our eyes. Here is our flight path for today's briefing. We're going to hit the signal anomaly, look at historical tradecraft, dive into the kinetic correlations and spatial vectors, run a threat assessment, and wrap up with your actionable CI directives.
Section 1. Let's break down this signal anomaly itself.
To do this, we really need to look right past the cover story of standard, everyday political posturing and focus entirely on the hard data. The number 38. The former president has claimed the war with Iran is almost over or that a deal is in sight exactly 38 times since the conflict escalated. Now, out there in the civilian media, this gets brushed off as a gaffe, right? Just an unrealistic prediction or political rambling. But from an intelligence standpoint, a repetition rate of exactly 38 identically themed statements flags as a massive statistical marker. It is way too repetitive and honestly too detached from the actual realities on the ground to just be simple persuasion. In our line of work, 38 times isn't a mistake. It's a perfectly calibrated anomaly.
This is where we have to completely shift our mindset from a civilian media interpretation to a strict counterintelligence framework. A civilian assessment looks at the words and judges whether they're accurate. But our tactical assessment? We ignore the literal meaning entirely. We treat the phrase itself as an empty vessel, literally just a coded signal marker designed for pattern recognition. If a statement sounds totally illogical to the general public, well, that's simply because the general public isn't the intended recipient.
Moving to Section 2, let's look at the historical precedents for this kind of open-source tradecraft.
To really buy into this tactical assessment, we've got to ground our working theory in established espionage methodology. The absolute most crucial point here is that broadcasting hidden instructions within public political rhetoric is not some wild new conspiracy theory. It's a heavily documented historical technique known as an open-source dead drop. This allows a handler to send a message to thousands, maybe millions of people simultaneously, knowing full well that only the embedded field operative actually possesses the cipher to decode it. It hides the signal in a giant sea of public noise. Intercepting it is nearly impossible unless you know exactly what phrase you're listening for.
We've seen this exact tactic constantly in historical spy tradecraft. Just look at the BBC's Radio Londons during World War II. They'd broadcast seemingly completely nonsensical phrases like, "the dice are on the table," or "the carrots are cooked," to trigger actions by the French resistance. Intelligence officials have always used public channels, newspapers, public radio broadcasts, specific weird phrasings and political speeches to signal operatives in occupied territories or the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. A phrase repeated an exact number of times on a very specific date meant a very specific thing to an agent listening in. Just like those historical precedents, these 38 detached from reality statements we're analyzing today are perfectly calibrated to act as secure channels for operatives verifying incoming instructions.
Section 3. This is where things get real. We're mapping the rhetoric directly to kinetic battlefield events.
Let's transition into the core data analysis, cross-referencing these 38 public statements with documented military incidents. And honestly, this correlation is what immediately set off alarm bells for my team. Look at this timeline. Statement 1 drops on May 14th, could be over very soon. Exactly 18 hours later, Military Operation X commences. Fast forward to May 29th, Statement 15 is broadcast. That very night, an Iranian supply line gets covertly disrupted. Then, on June 9th, Statement 38, deal with Iran is within reach. Just 6 hours later, multiple strikes reported. This is absolutely not a coincidence. The timing is simply too precise, and the real-world outcomes are too perfectly aligned with the public broadcasts.
Let's isolate Statement 15 for a second. We're winning much faster than expected, uttered seemingly right out of nowhere during a totally standard media address. When we take that exact timestamp and overlay it with our kinetic activity logs, we see the supply line disruption initiated immediately after nightfall. For a highly trained field operative, hearing "winning much faster" on a public broadcast could easily be the prearranged go code to accelerate a planned infrastructure sabotage schedule.
All right, Section 4. Let's dig into the spatial and temporal vectors of this broadcast data.
Because we have to analyze not just when these claims are made, but where they're made and the specific timing gaps between the broadcast and the subsequent damage reports. This data maps out the spatial and temporal vectors. Notice how the location of these broadcasts fluctuates. Some happen at rallies, some during press gaggles. By mapping the broadcast coordinates right alongside the claim timestamp, we can start to see how these factors actually influence the intended operative audience. For instance, if a statement is broadcast from a tarmac in Florida, say coordinates 26 degrees north, 80 degrees west, at 1000 hours local time, the timing gap to the kinetic event in the Middle East consistently hovers between 6 and 18 hours. And guess what? That is exactly the window needed for a forward-deployed unit to receive the signal, mobilize their gear, and execute a strike under the cover of local darkness.
Move into Section 5, the National Security Threat Assessment.
As we pivot to the threat assessment, we have to step back and ask the absolute most critical operational security question facing our intelligence community right now. If this is indeed coded communication, disguised as political rambling, and frankly, the data strongly suggests it is, we need to figure out who the actual recipients of these intelligence dead drops are. Are we talking about rogue assets, allied shadow units, private military contractors? And what is the exact cipher? Because I'll tell you right now, if we can't translate what the 38 statements actually mean, we are perpetually going to be 6 to 18 hours behind the next kinetic event. As your counterintelligence lead, I really have to emphasize this point: the national security implications of an active, unauthorized, open-source communication channel operating right in plain sight. They cannot be overstated. When operational signaling bypasses our secure, monitored military channels and happens on public television, it completely strips away our oversight. It introduces a massive vulnerability where a smart adversary could potentially spoof the signal or anticipate our movements just by monitoring public feeds. If a hostile intelligence service cracks this syntax, they could simulate a broadcast environment to trigger false flags, setting off kinetic events on their timeline, not ours.
Finally, Section 6. Let's get to your counterintelligence directives and actionable field orders.
Based on all this analysis, I am officially issuing the following protocols for our field analysts and units to monitor any and all future broadcasts. Step 1. Isolate all public broadcast vectors involving the primary subject. Step 2. Log the exact phrasing used regarding the conflict, I don't care how redundant it sounds, alongside the precise location and timestamp data. Step 3. Monitor the timing gaps immediately following the statement. Step 4. Cross-reference those gaps with any subsequent kinetic events or infrastructure damage globally. We are hunting for pattern confirmation, team.
Furthermore, any counterintelligence units detecting these potential signal triggers must immediately implement the following defensive measures. We need automated flagging of statistically anomalous phrase repetitions set up immediately. I want infrastructure damage reports cross-analyzed within a strict 24-hour window of any flagged broadcast. And finally, we must deploy counter-surveillance assets to future broadcast locations to monitor who else might be receiving or actively relaying these signals on the ground.
The takeaway here is that the war prediction is just the cover story, team. The pattern is the message. I'm going to leave you with this final tactical consideration to analyze as you head back to your desks. If the first 38 statements perfectly mapped to 38 kinetic events, what exactly is the 39th signal going to trigger? And more importantly, will we be positioned to intercept it before it happens? Keep your eyes on the data.
Come to me, chickens! Cock-a-doodle-doo!